Welcome to technical briefing for using the Housing Australia portal. In this briefing, we'll cover some things that you need to know before you start. We'll take you through the portal and show you how to apply for funding under the HAFFF and NHAF programs, as well as the HBA. We show you where you can make changes to your application, and also give you some tips on where you can get help or more information if you need more assistance with completing your application. Before you start, you should download and read the call for applications and other documents that we've got published on the downloads page. Any addendas that we've published since the date the call for applications were released will be available on the downloads page on the portal. On the downloads page on the portal, we've also got a detailed how to apply document, which has screenshots of every question that is asked on the online web form. To apply for funding, you need to have full access to the portal. If you only got downloads access to the portal, you won't be able to see the Apply Now button on the home page. To get full access, please contact technical support for assistance. It's important that before you start your application that you have complete and accurate registration or user details. This is because a lot of the details that you provide as part of your registration are used to pre-fill some of the application form, and a lot of that is done behind the scenes. Some things to be mindful of are to ensure that you've got the right entity category selected for your organization, whether that's a CHP, a state or territory, Indigenous housing provider, or a special purpose vehicle, or an NADF, or veterans housing provider, or local governing body. For SPVs, it's important that you have updated member details, the most up-to-date member details, before you click on the Apply Now button. The programs which you can apply for and who you can apply on behalf of will be determined by your registration or user details. On the portal, the person who logs in is the applicant on behalf of the organization they represent, and the applicant, depending on the entity category who they are, or which entity they fall under, can nominate certain other organizations to be the funding recipient. So for example, a CHP, a person who has registered an account on behalf of CHP organization, will be able to select another CHP, for example, as its subsidiary, as a funding recipient, and submit an application on behalf of its subsidiary. Another example of where the applicant might not be the same as the funding recipient is where the applicant is a state or territory or a local governing body, and they plan to appoint a CHP to undertake a project. In those circumstances, the state or territory or local governing body can apply and start an application and nominate a CHP to be a funding recipient, whether or not they currently have a CHP identified or not at the time of submitting the application. Whether you're able to nominate a funding recipient and complete and submit an application on behalf of a funding recipient will depend on what you've been registered, the entity category that you've been registered under. So for example, a special purpose vehicle can only apply for funding on behalf of itself. A special purpose vehicle won't be able to nominate another organization to be the funding recipient. Turning to the steps that need to be undertaken in order to create, complete, and submit an application on the Housing Australia portal. Step 1 is to create a project on the portal. In this step, you'll select whether you want to apply for HAFFF and NHAF funding alone or together with senior debt under the HBA. You'll also be asked to answer some questions on whether you'll be compliant with the Housing Australia investment mandate. After you've created the project, it is saved on the portal and you'll be taken to the next stage, the next step, the second step, where you start to provide information about the project itself. And this includes details about project costs, sites in your project. So you can have one site or you can have more than one site in each project. And if you have more than one site, then all the sites need to be within the same state or territory in order to be able to be eligible for funding under the HAFFF and NHAF. We'll walk you through on how to add a site to your project. And once you've added a site, you then need to add dwelling details to that site. And we'll show you how to do that in this video. Once you've provided details about your project, you submit your project information form and you continue on to step 3 in completing your funding applications. There are two, depending on what you've selected in step 1, you will either have 1 or 2 funding applications. If you've only selected that you want to apply for HAFFF and NHAF funding only, then you'll only need to complete and submit a HAFFF and NHAF application form. But if you've also selected that you want senior debt under the HBA, there will be 2 funding application forms that you'll need to complete for the additional AHBA application funding. Once you've completed your funding applications, the next step is to submit your application and lodge them to Australia Housing. After you've completed your funding applications and you've provided all the required information, a submit button will appear at the bottom of the application form to allow you to lodge the application with Housing Australia. Each funding application will need to be submitted individually in order to lodge them to Housing Australia. After you've submitted your funding application, you will not be able to make any changes to the application information. And this includes any changes to the files that you've uploaded in support of your application. If you need to make a change to an application, you need to withdraw the application in its entirety and start again by clicking on the Apply Now button. In the first funding round, the Housing Australia portal will not have the ability to be able to enable you to edit an application after it's been submitted. If after watching this technical briefing, you need help or more information on how to complete the online web form, you can download a copy of the How to Apply document that we've got available on the downloads page. You can also go to the FAQ section inside the portal to see if there's any information that answers some of the questions that you have on how to complete the form. If your question's not covered or answered in the FAQs or the How to Apply document, you can submit a question to Housing Australia using the Q&A facility. You can also use the Q&A facility to provide us with some feedback on suggestions on how to improve the portal. If you've got technical issues in using the portal, you can contact our technical support team on 02 8925 1800 and they'll be able to provide you with assistance. In the next part of the technical briefing, we'll walk you through on how to complete and submit an application using the Housing Australia portal. If you've got full access, once you've logged in, you'll be taken to the home page, downloads page, and this is the page that you'll see. Across the top, you've got the menu bar. You can see some of you have started to use the Q&A facility when you can ask a question and that'll be submitted to the relevant Housing Australia team to answer. We also got FAQs. If you got full access, after you're logged in, you'll see the homepage, which has an Apply Now button on the left-hand side. Across the top is the menu bar, where you can access the FAQs, the Q&A facility, a page with all your questions and the responses from Housing Australia. Across the top in the resources menu is the downloads page, where you can find all the downloads for the HAFFF and AHBA program, including the How to Apply document, which has detailed guidance and information that you need to be able to submit and complete your application. Across and to the right is where you'll find your registration or user details. It's important that you check that these details are up to date and complete before you start your application. Today, as you can see, I've registered as a community housing provider, and I'll be taking you through an example of where a community housing provider, as the applicant, nominates and applies on behalf of a special purpose vehicle as the funding recipient for funding under the HAFFF and AHBA program and the AHBA. So after I've checked that my user details are up to date and accurate, and want to start my application, I need to return to the home page or the dashboard by clicking on the home menu item at the top of the screen. The first step I need to do is to create a project on the Housing Australia portal. To do that, I just click on the Apply Now button, which is on the left-hand side of the screen. And click on the Apply Now. It'll come up with a screen that says New Application, and you can see there are 3 tabs across that I need to complete. Once I've completed these first 3 tabs, that creates a project and is saved on the portal, and I can come back to it at a later stage to continue and complete that application. The portal allows you to be able to create as many projects as you like. So once you've created each of these 3 tabs, the project is created, and you can have applications for multiple projects going on at the same time, meaning that you don't actually have to fully complete an application for a project and submit it before being able to start your application for another project. You can have a number of projects going or in the status of in progress. So getting on with trying to create my project, I will give my project a name and answer the question of which state or territory my project is located in. Now, to be eligible for HAFFF and AHBA funding, all the sites in your project, remembering that, once you create a project, you can have more than one site within your project. But if you do, then all the sites within your project need to be in the same state or territory to be eligible. Now, the portal won't validate that. It won't stop you from submitting an application if you've got sites in different states or territories, that is an assessment or compliance check that we will conduct after the application has been submitted. Today I've logged in as a community housing provider, and I'm going to submit application on behalf of a special purpose vehicle. So next question I need to answer is my organization the funding recipient? I'll answer no. As you can see, there is some helpful web text to guide you on what we mean or how to answer a particular question, together with embedded web links to FAQs. So for example, if I click on the link to the FAQ to who can be a funding recipient, it opens up another window with some information about who a funding recipient can be, depending on the programs that you apply for. Returning to the application itself, because I've selected that another organization will be the funding recipient, I need to answer the question of what type of entity will the funding recipient be, whether it be a CHP, an Indigenous housing provider, ADF or Veterans housing provider, or a special purpose vehicle. In this case, I'm going to select a special purpose vehicle, an SPV. Once I've selected an SPV, I'll then be asked the question of whether the SPV itself is going to be a registered community housing provider. And for these circumstances, I'm going to say yes. If I select no, then I need to select, to be able to continue, I need to select yes to the next question of whether this SPV itself will have an underlying eligible member. Now, an underlying eligible member is a person who's a member of the SPV, and the SPV itself is one of the entity categories that is eligible for funding, to apply for funding under HAFFF and AHBA. So meaning the member is a CHP, Indigenous housing provider, or an ADF or Veterans housing provider. A couple of things to note about the application is that if the question is mandatory and that you must complete it, then you'll see a red asterisk next to the question. We've also got some hover text or web text, hover text, I think we call it, yeah, or help text on some of the questions. When you hover across, that gives you a bit more detail or information on how to complete the question. Now that I've made my selections, I'm going to click on Save and Next, and it will save the responses that I've provided on this form. And move on to the Purpose of Housing Australia Funding tab. On this tab is where I select the funding products that I'd like to apply for. Because I'm a special purpose vehicle and I've selected the funding recipient because I'm a CHP and I've selected the special purpose vehicle as the funding recipient, the programs that the special purpose vehicle can receive funding from Australia under are the HAFFF and AHBA program, the NHAF, or the NHAF. Today, we're going to take you through the HAFFF and AHBA application, but because the special purpose vehicle itself is not a registered community housing provider, the AHBA option didn't show up, so I need to go back and change that. As you can see, the options of the products that you can apply for is determined by the entity category of the applicant, if the applicant is the same as the funding recipient. But if the applicant is not the same as the funding recipient, because the funding recipient is somebody else or another organization, then it's dependent on the entity category of the funding recipient that you've answered on the previous tab. Today, we're going to apply for HAFFF and NHAF funding, as well as HBA, and we're going to apply for takeout financing from the HBA. So click and save next. The next tab is the compliance with the investment mandate tab, where there's a bunch of questions about eligibility, which under the investment mandate that I need to answer to be able to receive funding under that program. The first question is whether the funding recipient will be an eligible project proponent for HAFFF or NHAF finance. To be able to proceed, I need to select yes to this question. The next question is whether the states, whether all the dwellings are going to be in the same state and territory. To be able to proceed, I need to answer yes to this question. The next compliance question I need to answer is whether the project has a development application or building application lodged on or after 1 October. If I don't, then I don't have to answer the next question on whether the project is HAFFF and NHAF construction compliant. I can just skip straight to the next eligibility question. But if I do have a development application or building application that's lodged after 1 October, then I need to answer the question on whether the project will be HAFFF and NHAF construction compliant. For more details on what that means, you can click on the FAQ. Now, to be able to proceed, I need to click yes and answer the question that the project will be HAFFF and NHAF construction compliant because my DA approval was after 1 October. The next question, I need to eligibility for HAFFF finance and eligibility for NHAF finance. I need to answer yes to at least one of these questions to be able to proceed. To be eligible for HAFFF finance, I need to at least have social or affordable dwellings in my project, and today's example, we're going to have both. So I'll select yes to that I'm eligible for HAFFF finance, as well as I'm eligible for NHAF finance. And because my SPV will be a registered community housing provider, I'll select yes to just confirm that the funding recipient will be a registered CHP. Now, you don't need to be registered at the time of application. You just need to have an intention and obtain registration by the time financial close occurs. Now that completes the first step of creating an application on the portal, creating a project on the portal, and that saved my project. And the next step, it's taken me to the project information section. But what I want to show you is that, I've created a project. I can go back to the dashboard on the home page, and you can see that my project has been created. Technical briefing project 1, and also a HAFFF and NHAF application has been created for my project based on the responses I've given in the start overview section, as well as a senior debt application under the HBA has also been created for my project. Now I can leave it at that and come back and complete the project details at a later stage by clicking on the project ID when I have more information. Or I can then continue on and create another project and go through the steps that I went through earlier to submit and create another project on the portal. On this demonstration, we'll just continue on. So to continue on, we've completed the first step, which is creating a project on the portal. Now we're moving on to the second step, which is to complete the project information. and provide project information details. Firstly, we need to provide a brief description of the project. In this case, we're just going to be purchasing off the plan dwellings from a developer. Acquisition commercial, it's going to be a turnkey acquisition. So your selection here on what your project involves should be consistent with what you've selected and set out in your pro forma financial model. Now that the project's been created and the funding applications have been created, I can either leave it at that and come back at a later stage to complete the application for this project, or I can click on the Apply Now button again to create a new project and on the portal. Now, you'll notice that once you've gone through what we call the Start Overview tabs, these first 3 tabs, you actually can't go back and change any of the responses that you've provided once you've submitted the compliance with an IM investment mandate section. So if you made a mistake, for example, on answering one of these compliance investment mandates questions, or you chose the wrong product or a funding program that you wanted to apply for, and you've already hit submit on the project, because you can't change any of that information, the best thing to do is just go back to the home page and click on Apply Now to create a new project with the correct details. And just answer and just go through each of the 3 tabs again and answer the questions. Provide more the quick questions to the answers that you want to provide. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to go back to the project I first created at the beginning of this demo and continue on with completing the project information details. So as you can see at the top, we've got the project ID and the project name. So that's the name that we gave the project at the beginning of when we created the project. The next question we have to provide is a brief description of what the project entails. We're going to be, for this demonstration, I'll be doing an application for a turnkey project. So I'm just purchasing completed social and affordable housing from a developer. You can see that it's a free text field, and at the bottom there is 2 diagonals. Once you hover your mouse cursor over it, you can actually resize this box if you need to, because you're providing a lot more detail. Or you can resize it so that you can get more secure screen space. So we're going to do that. The next question is I have to ask whether my project involves a development arrangement or a turnkey acquisition, whether I'm building the dwellings myself or arranging for it to be built, or I'm purchasing it completed. So in this case, we're doing a turnkey acquisition. The responses that you provide on the online web form should be consistent with the responses that you provide in the pro forma financial model, as well as the returnable schedules and supporting documents. because I, as the applicant, the user submitting the application on the portal is not the same as the person who's going to receive funding from Housing Australia. I'm applying on behalf of a special purpose vehicle. I need to provide contact details at the special purpose vehicle. Yep. And last name. And provide an email address. A mobile number for the contact. And a work telephone. Need to provide an ABN. Because it's the SPV is the funding recipient is an SPV, I don't have to provide an ABN. There's no asterisk there. But by way of an example for this demonstration, I'm going to insert the ABN so you can see that you just type in, I'm going to use a dummy ABN for this. You click on validate and it'll auto-populate the name of the funding recipient. The entity category for the funding recipient is grayed out here. I can't change that or select a different entity category. This is this answer is pre-filled from a response that I provided as part of the section when I created the project in the Start Overview tab. Providing a physical address for the SPV. I need to answer the next question is whether it has a different postal address. For the purpose of this demonstration, we'll say that it's the same. Because the SPV itself is a separate entity, I need to answer the question of whether SPV will be registered as a charity. Now, you don't need to be registered as a charity in order to continue and to be able to submit an application for funding, but you do need to be registered by the time that you receive funding from Housing Australia. The next question, because I've selected the SPV will be the funding recipient, is a section where I need to provide some details about the SPV itself, and then following on from that, the details about the members of the SPV. So the first question is to ask, well, what's the purpose of the SPV and its role in the project? To own and manage social and affordable housing. In the extension of adding member detail, there's two questions here about whether the SPV will be a CHP and whether the SPV has an underlying eligible member. These questions are pre-filled from the Start Overview tab, so you can't change them here. And again, if you've made an incorrect response, because you can't change them here, the best thing that you can do is just create a new project and start again. Moving on to adding details about the members of the SPV, I need to add at least one member because the SPV is going to be a CHP itself. So I need to only add at least one member. And I'm going to use dummy ID here. Now, if my SPV was not going to be a registered CHP, that is, I answered no to the question on whether the SPV will be a registered community housing provider, then to proceed, I need to add a member that is an underlying eligible member in order to proceed. It won't let me proceed without it. But because I've answered yes, that the SPV will be a CHP, I don't need to have a member that is an underlying eligible member. The next set of questions are asking about whether, what's the ownership and voting interest in terms of percent. And the next question is, what is my relationship to the SPV? What is the member's relationship to the SPV? And say it's the ultimate parent. The next question asks, well, what are the activities that the member is engaged in? So I'm just putting delivery of social and affordable housing. And we also asked the question about, well, what experience does the member have, and what expertise and experience that they have that they'll bring to the project. And just provide some background information about the expertise. And once you've completed all the details of the for that particular member, you click submit, and you can see that a record was created for that member, and the details are summarized in the table on the project information page. Now, if I have more than one member, I'll just click on add a new member again and go through the same process, add a new member details. If I've misstated some information incorrectly about the member that I've already added, I can click on this arrow, drop-down arrow, and edit the member details and say, for example, oh no, it didn't actually have 100% ownership. They only had 80%. I can amend that as I go along and then click submit, and those details will be updated. Now, similarly, if I've put in too many members and there shouldn't be that many, and I want to delete it, I can just click on the drop-down box again and delete the member. Once I've added all the member details, and move on to the next question, where it asks whether the project is being undertaken by a consortium. So if the funding recipient is an SPV, you will be asked this question, whether they are a part of a consortium. And similar to how we added details about the member for an SPV, you would add details about the members of the consortium. So the members of the consortium include the SPV itself, and whether it's going to be a CHP, so we put CHP, and so on. So you just keep, if you've got a developer or private capital arranger involved in your consortium, you just click on add new member and add their details. And similarly, you can edit their details or delete them as a member from the consortium if you accidentally entered the incorrect information. Because it's the special purpose vehicle, we've answered previously to say that it itself will be a registered community housing provider. The questions, we need to provide CHP details. And the first question is whether the CHP, the SPV has obtained registration as a CHP. Now, you don't need to answer yes in order to submit the application. This is just more for data collection purposes for your application. But if you do, as you can see, if you answer no, some of the information is not mandatory because it's probably not available because you haven't been registered. But if you answer yes, then you need to answer the questions on the legal form of the CHP and what primary jurisdiction is it currently registered in or will be registered in, and the tier, whether it's registered as a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and the registration number for the for the CHP. Once you've completed the CHP details, we move on to the financial information about the project. So for this example, you've got to enter the purchase price. You can see in the hover text what we mean by what you need to include in the purchase price. There's line items for about a separate line item for professional consultant fees, if there are any. You input the number there, the contingency, and any other costs that are related to the project. So in this case, we've got $100,000 for reimbursing our parent for transaction costs as an example. Once you've entered all the line items for the project costs, it automatically adds them up and shows you the total in the total project acquisition box section. All the numbers that you enter should be GST exclusive, and all the numbers that you enter here should be the same as the numbers that you have in your pro forma financial model. If you've got any non-reclaimable GST, you need to input that here in the non-reclaimable GST section. In this case, we'll have 0, so we'll just put 0. So after you've provided the breakdown line items for the project costs, the next section on the project information form is the other project funding sources. So in this section, what we're interested in to understand is who else is helping you fund your project. So to get started, you just click on the add new funding. And again, the information that you provide here should be consistent with the information that you've got in your pro forma financial model. The first question asks whether the funding that your details that you're adding is funding for the development phase or the operating phase. You should add a separate row item for each of the different funding sources that you've got in each phase. So in this case, we're just going to use 15 million, for example, and an ABN we've got here, National Australia Bank as an example. Source category, what type of entity they are, and what kind of funding that they're providing. And here we've got availability payment as a funding source. So for example, if you are applying, if you are receiving funding from a state and territory, you may be receiving some funding by way of an availability payment. So this is not an availability from Housing Australia. This whole section's about funding from other sources that is not Housing Australia. And if you select availability payment, you can see we ask, how long, what's the term of the availability payment that you're going to receive from the state and territory, for example, and the estimated amount of the availability payment that you can receive throughout the whole term. So we say $1 million a year, for example, and it's a total of 20 million. And the last thing that you need to answer about a funding source is the status, whether it's been approved, conditionally approved, or applied for, but not yet approved, or you're about to apply for, or you only receive support in principle. I'll just click on Save and Close. So you need to go through and add new funding for each part of your capital stack for the development phase. And just go through the same process, and similarly do the same for the operating phase. But you don't need to include the funding that you're applying from Housing Australia. That's done separately, not on this tab. And similarly, you can see here, as for the SPV member details and consortium details table, you can go back in and edit the funding details and tweak it to make until the final numbers that you've got before you submit your application, and save and close it with your new details. Or if that particular funding source is no longer available or not applicable, then you can delete the funding line item as well, and just continue that up until you'll be able to do this up until you submit your application. Once you've completed your revenue, once you've provided details about the project funding sources, the next section we ask you about is just some financial information about your project, and in particular the revenue and expenses for the first year of the project's operations, and the financial assumptions that you've made in the financial model for your project. Turning to the revenues and expenses side, the first line item is to tell us about all other revenues, which include subsidies that you're going to receive for the project, but excluding rent, because we ask rent at a more granular level when we get to the next section and the section after about site details and dwelling details. So this is just other revenues or other revenues. Similarly, we've got a line item for expenses and outgoings, and the life cycle contributions that you're going to make as a to the reserve on a per annum basis for the project. And turning to the financial assumptions, what's your letting up period that you've assumed? So for the demo, we've assumed that it's going to be 1 month as an example. So we're purchasing it turnkey. What vacancy level have you assumed for your project? What revenue escalation and what expenses escalation? Once you've completed the revenue, expenses, and financial assumptions, the next section is to add the site details. As you can see, I've now completed and have filled in and provided a response to all the fields that are contained on the project information form. Once I've done that, I can actually save this project information form by clicking on the Save and Close button at the bottom of the form. And that lets me save all the details that I've already inputted on the project form itself, the project information form that is that field. And I can come back to it at a later time. Come back to it by clicking on the hyperlink, the project ID hyperlink, and continue on with that form. So as you can see, clicking on the hyperlink for the project ID, it retrieves all the information that I've entered in before, and I can continue on with the application. So to be able to save the project form, you need to complete each of these fields that are on the form itself. You don't need to necessarily, you need to satisfy the validation rule by adding at least one member detail, for example. You don't necessarily need to have added any details about your project funding sources yet to save the form, but you will need to add in the financial information that's available on a field that's directly on the form to be able to save. Going to the site details, a site's defined as a property with its own title and reference. So, most applications we expect are probably only going to have one site in the project, but there could be, and we acknowledge that there are a lot of people out there that may want to submit an application for a project that has more than one site. And so this is where you can add more than one site to your project. To do so, you can just click on the Add New Site button, and the site details pop-up will come up, where you can start filling in site information. So the first thing we need to do is provide a name of the site, and this is just the name that you would refer to or description the site within your organization. Provide the title details for the site and address of the site. If you can't find the address, there is an option here available to you to manually enter the address yourself. But for the purpose of this example, we're gonna use a resolved address. The next question asks about whether your site is well located and, for example, access to work, schools, transport, and other amenities. And if so, you can provide a brief description in the free text box here. And again, you can adjust the size of the box depending how long your response is that you want to provide in support of your application. Next question we ask is, who is the current owner of the site, whether it's the applicant, the funding recipient, or a state or territory or other government body. Now, if it is another government body that owns the site, there are additional questions that you need to answer. The first question is whether the availability of the site is subject to a procurement process by the state, territory, or other government body. And if so, then what is the name of the procurement process? So, for example, Social Housing Fund, State Fund number 1 is the name of the procurement. So you just provide a name description of the procurement. Next question we ask is about whether the site is freehold or leasehold. If it's freehold, then you just move on to the next question. If it's leasehold, there are some additional questions that we'd like you to answer. For example, how long is the lease term? Whether the lease can be renewed. If so, then provide us with description about what the renewal provisions are like. For example, your lease term can be renewed automatically at the election of the SPV, the lessee, sorry. And if there's no breach, it will be automatically renewed. Next question is asked, well, what is the current use of the site? Whether you currently have vacant land, currently has vacated buildings that are about to be demolished, or whether there are social, affordable, market, SDA dwellings, or whether it's currently non-residential use. So this is a multi-option field, so you can choose one or more answers here. If you select social, affordable, or SDA dwellings, then there is an additional question that you need to answer. In particular, what is the number of social, affordable, or SDA accommodation currently on the site? So this is to help us to understand, additionality. Once you've answered those questions, the next two questions are about, well, what are the restrictions on the site? And the first one's about whether there are any regulatory restrictions imposed by a state, territory, or other government authority. For example, there are, covenants on the land that must be used for social housing on the site, as an example. Another example is whether there are environmental restrictions on the site. Once you've answered that question, you can answer the question whether there'll be restrictions placed on it by a lender. So currently there is an existing mortgage to the construction financier. On completion will be a mortgage to subordinated lender. So just some examples of what encumbrances will be placed by other lenders. The next lot of questions are about builder details and the quantity surveyor details. First question is whether the project's been tendered to builders or not. In our case, it's a turnkey project, so we'll just answer no. Has a builder been selected? In this case, there is a builder that's been selected. The developer has chosen a builder, and we'll just provide details of what that builder is. And if we do know the details of what the contract sum would be, we want to know the question. The next question is whether the builder itself is WHS accredited builder, and if so, the date on that its accreditation expires. Now you can find out the date of when a builder's accreditation expires on the website of the Office of the Federal Safety Commissioner, and we've given you a link in the help text on how to find that information. The next question is whether the proposed development on the site is built with any modular developments, and a question about whether we have QS has been selected. Not so much relevant for a turnkey project, but if you are building and constructing the dwellings, then just provide some details. You need to answer additional questions by providing the ABN of the QS surveyor, the quantity surveyor, and some details of whether the project costs have been verified by the quantity surveyor, and when do you expect to receive an additional report from the QS. The next question, we try to understand, how involved a registered community housing provider is has the extent of a community housing provider's involvement in the project, whether they would be an owner of the dwellings in the long term from completion, or whether they'll also be the manager. So they're just yes and no questions you answer there. Next sort of questions about dwelling details, about the number of dwellings that are to be delivered on purchase on the site. Are there any that are existing that were previously occupied as residential? Any that are new that are to be built? So as turnkey, that is, they're all going to be built. They haven't been completed yet, so they're in the way of midway construction. So we'll just put 15. None of them are already built. None of them are actually renovated because they'll knock down, rebuild, and none of them were converted from non-residential use to residential use. So we'll just answer no there. The next question is about the density of the dwellings to be purchased. We would say that's medium density apartments. Or detached townhouses, 15 dwellings, probably about more townhouses. And if there's any commercial or retail space, so quite often these days you're in medium or high rise apartments, there's commercial space underneath. So if you can just let us know what the approximate area of commercial space there is and how many car parks are expected to be on the site. Once you've answered those questions about the site itself, we've got some questions about the planning and site timing. So this is around the planning approval or development approvals. Do you have one that currently aligns with the site's design? The options are the answer that you can provide a no, or you're about to submit one, and if you are, then let us know when you expect to obtain planning or development approval. Often you can have a DA or planning approval, but it's not a full approval, and so you just need to get an amendment to get the full approval. If you only have a partial approval, we ask you, what's the date that you obtain partial approval? And if you've got full approval, then we ask you the date that you obtained full approval. Once you've answered those questions, you can then go back. The next set of questions we ask are about the date on construction on the site commenced and the date that you expect construction to be completed. So there's a simple validation rule here that requires the date that you expect construction to be completed to be after the date you expect construction to commence. So you might see an error message pop up if you don't satisfy those rules. The last set of questions that we ask about the site is, to what extent the project has support from state and territory planning regulations. So, for example, the first question is about whether there's the project benefits from a density uplift in the state and territory, in the state or territory in which it's located, and if so, how many additional dwellings social affordable market, or SDA, do you get because of those favorable planning regs? And the next question is whether there's an estimated, how much time have you saved because of expedited approvals in the state and territory. Once you've answered those questions, you click Save and Close. If you've met all the validation rules, then it'll let you add and save those details to the site details table. Because I've not done that, I go back and so QS, we say no to QS, it's purchase contract, and it's going to let me submit. Once I've clicked Save and Close, that adds the site to my project, and it takes me to the dwellings details screen. So now we've added our site to our project. Now we're going to add the dwelling details to that site. So we need to do that. We could just click on the Add Dwelling Details. And you need to add at least one record of dwelling details for your site to be able to submit or proceed with your application. So in our project, we're going to have some affordable housing. They're all going to be townhouses, unit townhouses, 2-bedroom houses, townhouses, and the number of dwellings. So we've got 15, for example, and because of affordable housing, we can say an estimated weekly rental for them. The question we're going to need to ask is, have the dwellings ever been used for affordable housing? Yes or no, so that we can understand the uplift in the number of affordable housing. The next quick questions are about, or which cohorts do you plan to target for the 15 affordable housing that we've added, for example. Here we've got some predefined cohorts. You need to just answer, and these numbers here and the cohorts need to add up to the number of dwellings in order to proceed. So I think I've already not even there yet. So, and now if the people you're planning to target don't fall within one of these other predefined categories, you can just put them in the general non-targeted cohort and provide, a brief description on who they might be, for example, youth with mental illness. And the last question that we ask about this particular dwelling is whether any of them are aimed at improving housing in Indigenous communities. So that's relating to addressing acute housing needs for Indigenous people, such as housing in remote communities. Once we answer all of those questions, you click on Save and Close, and you can see that the total number of cohorts doesn't equal the total number of affordable dwellings. So I've got to go back and change that. So let's go to 15 to 2009. And that will now let me add that to the dwelling details table. You can see here there's a drop down arrow. If I've made a mistake or need to change the details, I can go in and edit dwelling details for the dwellings that I've just entered and go through and submit the new details. Or I can delete the dwellings if I've added too many records. I need to repeat this process for each type of dwelling and each type of configuration of the dwelling. And again, the information that you provide here should be consistent with the information that's set out in your pro forma financial model. For social housing, there are some additional questions that we do ask. in particular, whether the rent is asked on a per exclusive of CRA and inclusive of CRA, for example, and whether the rent policy provides the same out-of-pocket costs to the tenant as if they were a tenant in the public housing in the state and territory where the site is located. You see, I have the same cohort questions. Now, if you've when you add, if you've got any market housing, the additional questions that we ask are how many you plan to retain, so build to rent, and or how many you plan to sell after completion. So we're going to go through and just add some details about some social housing so I can show you what some of the options that pop up on the HAFFF and AHBA application form. So I'm just going to put in some values here. And submit those dwelling details. Once I've added all the dwelling details for the site, I can click on Save and Close. And here you can see that the site has been added to the site details table. If I need to make a change to the site details, I'll click on Edit Site, and it'll come up with the site details for me to be able to amend as I need to, and then submit it with new details. Or if I need to change the dwellings on the site, dwelling details on the site itself, I'll just go to Edit Dwelling Details, and that will pop up the dwelling details box for me to then go through, make the amendments that I need to make. Similarly, if I've added a site and I've changed my mind and I don't need this site in this project because I want to, for example, I want to submit an individual application for that site. So I've got to go back and go back to the home page and create a new project and add the site to that project. I can just delete the site from this project here, and I'll delete the site. But we won't do that in this demo because I need to have at least one site to continue. Once I've completed all the project information forms, so this is step 2 of the application process, I can submit the project information form by clicking the Submit button here. But before I do that, you can see that there is a window at the bottom of all the applications that have been created for this project. And so the way the portal set up is that I only need to provide project information once, and I can use the details that I've provided here to apply for funding under more than one program. So in this instance, we're going to apply for funding under HAFFF and AHBA, as well as senior debt under AHBA. So I'll click Submit to submit my project. Once I've submitted my project, I can't go back and change project details. So even if I click on the hyperlink, you can see that all the form's been closed and it's been submitted. I can't change any information. If I need to change any information, I can either start again by just submitting, just going back to the home page and clicking Apply Now and just creating a new project and submitting the new details. Or I can send a request through the Q&A facility to change some of the details in the field if it's before the close of the application window. In a future release, some of the things that we'll have is you'll see a drop-down arrow here, for example, where you'll then be able to click on it to go through and see the site details that you provided and the dwelling details that you provided. And so this is to surface all the information that you submitted as part of your application. So that's coming in a couple of weeks or so. to close. So once I've submitted my project form, I'm taken to the dashboard or the home page, and I need to go through. To continue, I need to complete the product specific forms. So that's the HAFFF and NHAF application form itself, for example, by clicking on the application ID for the HAFFF and NHAF application forms. I'll just go to do that by selecting it. Once I've clicked on the hyperlink to the HAFFF application ID for the HAFFF and NHAF application form, it takes me to the application form itself for that product. You can see there's an application ID at the top, the project name and the project ID to which it's connected to. Here I'm able to select what HAFFF and NHAF funding I'd like to apply for, whether it's just an availability of payment of it on its own, or whether I'd like to select a concessional loan. So the concessional loan will only pop up if the funding recipient is a CHP or an Indigenous housing provider or an ADF or Veterans housing provider. And also, like if you're an SPV and 100% of the voting interest is held by a CHP, Indigenous housing provider, or an ADF or Veterans housing provider. So this will, and you've got social and affordable in your project. So if those conditions aren't satisfied, then you won't be able to apply for concessional loan. And that's one of the examples that it's important to have the registration details completed and accurate so that the right options do pop up for you and are available to you to apply for. Because we've got social housing in our project, the grants option does appear, but you aren't able to directly apply for a grant as set out in the call for applications document. To continue, we just need to put in how much availability payment we would like to apply for the project. So if your project has more than one site, this is the total amount of availability payment for the whole project, so across all the sites. Once we've put in the amount that we wanted per annum, excluding GST, it automatically sums that up over 25 years, and gives you the total amount of funding that you're looking to apply for. So here we haven't applied for a concessional loan. So if you apply for a concessional loan, you have to apply for an availability payment. In the concessional loan, we ask you whether you need that from the development phase, in which case it needs to be for a tenure of at least 25 years, or whether you only require concessional loan during the operating phase. So you just need to let us know. The next section of the form is the file upload section. This is where you upload all the documents that you need to upload to support your application. For the HAFFF and NHAF application form, there are 3 separate file upload sections. The first one is what we call project certainty. It's just to give us an idea on how mature your project is. To be able to submit the form, you need to answer and select an item in each of the drop-downs, each of the 12 drop-downs in the project certainty section. Where you get to the development arrangement or turnkey acquisition, you need to select at least one of the options in here, or NA. So if it's a turnkey acquisition, then you select NA for development arrangement and vice versa. And similarly, if you don't have affordable housing, you just select NA. Otherwise, just select one of the best available options in the drop-down list that describes your project. and the same for social housing. We've got operating costs, negative costs, senior debt, and timing. Now, once you've selected the best option in the drop-down list that describes your project, you can choose to upload. You should upload the supporting document to support your selection. And you can do that by just clicking on Choose File and selecting on the file you'd like to upload. And you can see the name here has appeared that you've already uploaded this file. If you want to replace that file, you can choose File again and select the new file, and it will automatically replace that file. A couple of things to be mindful of is that the portal will only let you upload one file per Choose File button. So if for each row item, you can only upload one file. If you have more than one supporting document that you'd like to provide for each row item, then you need to combine them, but by merging the PDFs or something like that, and then you can upload the file. The other thing to be mindful of is that the portal will only accept certain file formats. And so that's Word, Excel, PDF, PowerPoint, or and CSV. It won't accept any other formats. Once you've put in all your details for the project, so this section, the next file upload section that you'll need to complete is the returnable schedules section. And these are the returnable schedules that you've downloaded from the downloads page on the portal and completed. Once you've filled in those details, you can upload them here. There are 5 in total. You need to upload all 5 in order to be able to submit the application. And once you've uploaded all your files for the returnable schedule section, the last file upload section that you need to complete is the supporting document section. So all of these supporting documents are technically optional from a technical perspective on the portal, but as a program application, like if the returnable schedule requires you to provide it, then it's mandatory. So each of these are coded at the beginning where you can see which returnable schedule it relates to. So RS1 means returnable schedule 1. If returnable schedule 1 requires you to provide a project concept design where it's available, then you need to provide and upload it by clicking on the Choose File Upload button. And similarly, just go through each of the row items and just upload the ones that you are required to upload before you submit your application. Now, if you have additional supporting documents that you'd like to provide as part of your application, which are not listed here, you can click on Add File. And the way you should number it is firstly indicate which returnable schedule it relates to. So for example, returnable schedule 1. So, and I'm going to say this is my own supporting document. So I'm going to say my additional supporting document. And then I just click on Choose File and upload the file. Now, you can see that it's added the description and the file as a new row item. If I had another supporting document, I'll click on Add File again and put in which returnable schedule it relates to at the beginning and the name of the file, what it is. Now I can repeat this process for as many additional supporting documents I need to provide, but I can only add a new row after I've provided a description and uploaded the file. So it's not going to let me, this Add File button won't be available to you until you've actually uploaded the file. to the additional file that supporting document that you've added. After I've gone through and answered all the file uploads, addressed all the file uploads, the next, I'm almost near the end of my HAFFF and AHBA application form, and I just need to answer these questions, questions about conflicts, whether I have any or not, and if so, then what they are and what the strategy that I've got in place to address them, and details about the last question is whether there is anything in this application that I've put forward that is confidential, and so just let us know so we know how to treat some of the information that you provide as part of the application. As you can see, at the moment I can only save my application because I haven't answered or provided all the information that I need to provide in order to submit this application. For example, I need to click on the applicant declaration, confirm these matters before I can submit the application itself. So the submit button's appeared, but it's grayed out. So that means that there's something on this form that I haven't completed and I need to answer. So to go back and answer, and here it is. This draft project program is mandatory, and I need to upload a copy of this to be able to submit the application form. So now you can see the submit button's appeared and it's going to let me submit. Oh, no. Other than my bill payment got changed. So let me put that back in. And now I can submit. Once I've submitted the HAFFF and AHBA application form, it takes me back to the dashboard, the homepage, and you can see here that the application status has now been submitted and it's been lodged to Housing Australia. So you need to make sure that the application shows that it's submitted, and that means the application has been lodged to us. If you've got a AHBA application you want for your projects, you got to go and click on the application ID for the AHBA application. So here it was for technical briefing project 1. I can see here it's for technical briefing project 1. There is an AHBA application, and that application is still in progress. So to continue, I need to click on the application ID. So now I'm on the AHBA application form, and you can see there's an application ID at the top, and the project name and project ID to which the AHBA application relates. So it's technical briefing project 1 that's connected to. I'm just going to put in first how much I want to borrow from AHBA. And earlier I selected that it was to refinance a constructions facility from another lender. So that was selected on the Purpose of Australia, Housing Australia funding page. Because I've selected to refinance a construction facility, the loan is automatically selected that it's during the operating phase. I need to select what type of facility I'm looking for. Is it a corporate facility? Am I borrowing against my balance sheet? Or is it a project finance facility where it's only the security is only the assets of the project? The loan type, whether I'm looking for a bullet loan or whether I'm okay for there to be synthetic amortization on my loan. The HBA loan that is provided for a project that is receiving HAFFF and AHBA projects is a tailored product, and they're all provided for a default of 25 years, a default tenor of 25 years, just to match with the availability payment term. The next but you can change it if you want to. If you want for a lesser period, for example, you can change it. The next question we ask is, how you plan to manage interest rate risk arising from the project, whether it's going to be unhedged, unmanaged, or whether you plan to manage it in some other way, for example, by obtaining a derivative from a commercial bank, or alternatively, you may indicate you're interested in the interest rate risk being managed, or you have assistance from managing it with through funding from Housing Australia. Once you've answered that question, you just let us know when you expect the date of first drawdown to be, so we can understand when you need the funds. Because I've selected refinancing, there's some additional questions about the total payout amount and what other refinancing costs are there. And here we ask you, well, what's the name of the lender that's being refinanced, for example? And you can enter up to 3, but you need to at least provide 1. We ask you to provide details about whether the loan being refinanced is a construction loan or a term loan, and you can select both if it's both types of finance, up to both types are being refinanced. Here we ask you to how the loan will improve housing outcomes for for Australians. And lastly, in this section, we ask you, well, have you tried to obtain finance from the private sector before you seeking a loan under the HBA? And if so, just let us know, how much was the indicative interest rate that that they offered you, and briefly describe the terms that for example, that they were offering you for that senior debt financing. Once you've answered that question, you're in the file upload section for the HBA form, and you need to provide copies of the following supporting documents. Those that have indicated with the red asterisks are the ones that you must provide before you can submit the application form. The others are optional and dependent on the circumstances of your project, or dependent on what you've already provided as part of your HAFFF and AHBA application form. So some of these, even though technically they may not appear as mandatory to upload, but your circumstances may require you to upload them. So I'm going to upload the ones that are required to submit this form. Go down to phone, seems to be only 3 so far, the mandatory. And similarly, we ask you to provide some details about the conflict of interest and details of which parts of your application are confidential. And you have to check the applicant declaration in order to be able to submit your AHBA form. Once I've submitted my AHBA form, the portal takes me back to the dashboard again. And you can see here, I've now have an application status of submitted for my AHBA application for technical briefing project 1. Now I can be sure that both my applications are submitted. Once I've submitted my funding applications, I can go back into them and see the answers that I provided as part of my application in read-only form. I won't be able to change any of that because I've already submitted the application. And similarly, you can go back and have a look at the project information details as well. So, look, as I said, you can go back, open project information details, and a future release will have drop downs to enable you to go back and have a look at the information that you provided as part of a table. There'll be a little arrow here that says view details, and it'll open up a box, pop-up box for you to see the responses that you provided. So going back to in a future release, there will be a drop-down box at the end of this row here as well to enable you to withdraw an application. So if you've submitted an application and you no longer want that application to be assessed by Housing Australia, you can withdraw the application. The circumstances in which you may want to try do that is, for example, where you've made a mistake in the application and you want to update the details and provide more correct details. You can simply withdraw the application yourself and click on Apply Now and resubmit the application by entering the correct details. We don't have an ability, or there won't be an ability in this first funding round for you to be able to go into an application and recall it and be able to edit the application information details. So the best approach is either to withdraw the application, click on Apply Now and resubmit it, or send a request via the Q&A facility of the details that you'd like to be amended. But our ability to be able to change any of your application information after the closing window will be very limited. So we'll encourage you to get as many of the details as correct as possible before you submit your application. That concludes the technical briefing for using on how to use the Housing Australia portal. And thank you for your time today. Again, if you've got any questions, please refer to the how-to guide that is available on our downloads page. You can also refer to the FAQs that we'll make available throughout the application window on the portal, or if none of those answer your question, then you can submit a question through our Q&A facility, and someone from the Housing Australia team will be able to assist.